It's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
This is where they fought the Battle of Gettysburg. 50,000 men died right here on this field, fighting the same fight that we're still fighting amongst ourselves today. This green field right here, painted red, bubbling with the blood of young boys, smoke, and hot lead going right through their bodies. Listen to their souls, man. Killed my brother with malice in my heart, hatred, destroyed my family. You listen. You take a lesson from the dead. If we don't come together right now on this hollow ground, we too will be destroyed. Just like they were. I don't care if you like each other or not, but you will respect each other. And maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll learn to play this game like men.
I once read an interesting book. It said that most people lost in the wilds, they die of shame.
What?
Yeah. See, they die of shame. What did I do wrong? How could I have gotten myself into this? And so they sit there and they die. Because they didn't do the one thing which would have saved their lives.
And what is that, Charles?
Thinking.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
What's up, all you golf swing nerds, high-performing golf coaches, and continuous learners? Welcome to another episode of the Golf Guru Show. I am your host, Jason Sutton, aka The Guru. If you have been listening to this last season, thank you so much. If you are new to the program, I welcome you to another great season of learning and growing via the Golf Guru Show. To repeat my goal for this project, it is my mission to teach out the habits, life lessons, and self-development ideas from the best in the coaching and teaching world. I hope that you find this information on the show applicable to all occupations and fields of study. Thank you so much, and I'm so grateful to all the outstanding guests that have been on the show thus far and their willingness to share their knowledge and expertise. But most of all, I want to thank you, the listener. Thank you for subscribing and supporting the podcast. On this episode, my guest is Michael Finney. Michael is the Director of Instruction at Louisville Golf Club in Louisville, Kentucky, and one of the brightest minds in our teaching industry. He has worked closely with people like Dr. Sasha McKenzie, Dr. Kwan, and many others, as we will discuss and dig into his side of the Alpha Wars debate, which is the main reason I wanted to have him on the show. This was a very wide-ranging conversation that took many twists and turns, as you can imagine, and one that you golf science geeks will thoroughly enjoy for sure. So without further ado, let's hear from Mr. Michael Finney. Enjoy.
Okay.
All right, Michael Finney, welcome to the show, man. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you doing this.
Jason, no problem. I really enjoy, discussing the golf swing. So this is a great opportunity for me to do so.
Absolutely. So before we get into the good stuff, we're obviously going to talk about club kinetics and some of the stuff going on in the teaching industry. Take us back to kind of how you got started, right? Give us a little lineage of your career. How did you get into golf as a child, and sort of bring us up to date of just a sort of comic book strip of your career.
Sure. I started when I was 10 years old. My brothers, my two older brothers, played golf, and they sometimes they snuck off without me, but sometimes they allowed me to come with them. And grew up out at City Park in New Orleans. We had 4 18-hole golf courses, and it was junior golf heaven. A lot of kids my age, a little bit older, that I played with. And became a good enough junior golfer to go to Louisiana State University, LSU,
Nice.
and played golf there. We had a great team. Buddy Alexander, who went on to coach Florida for a bunch of years, was our coach when we got there. So had a great team, great experience there. Played with a lot of really fantastic players. Pretty much found out in my college days that my game wasn't going to put food on the table, and like a lot of other guys, like myself, ended up going the club pro route and worked at a few 2 or 3 private clubs in Louisiana. I actually went up to Louisville, Kentucky in 1993 to work as an assistant to Tommy Mudd, Jody Mudd's little brother, about 25 years ago now, 26 years ago.
Wow.
And I've been in Louisville ever since. My wife is a Louisville native and worked at several private clubs here in town, including Valhalla Golf Club as an assistant. Was the head pro for a long time at a place called Owl Creek Country Club, small little private club. And 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, I became the director of instruction at the University of Louisville Golf Club, and been there for a few years, and really have enjoyed it. Being a full-time teacher, so much different than being a club pro,
For sure.
Day in and day out, which I think you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're a head professional.
No,
So,
I'm a director of instruction as well. Same route. Though.
Oh, you're okay, but you were a club pro.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Gotcha. So similar routes that we've taken, but that's where I am, Louisville, Kentucky.
What kind of spurred you on to like want to teach full time? And was there like a moment, or like was it sort of was it a conscious decision, or was it you just weren't getting as much teaching time, or what was it?
Well, no. Well, to be honest, after 17 years as head pro, the club decided to go a different route. So my hand was a little bit forced. However, teaching was always my biggest passion in the golf business. So I taught a decent amount when I was a club pro, and I always was interjecting myself into conversations throughout the years. Since I got out of college in 1990. I went to the second teaching and coaching summit in 1990. I missed the first one in 88. I was still in school.
90 was legendary, wasn't it? I mean, that's the one when that Jim Hardy.
Opryland.
Yeah.
Opryland, yeah. Yeah, I'm assuming you were there. It was pretty fun.
The pluses and minuses and all that came out. I thought that was pretty groundbreaking at the time.
Exactly. And I'm not a detail-oriented memory person. I can get my years mixed up, but just the collective experience at all the teaching summits in between the 2 years that they would have them, I was always, I've been looking at the golf swings since I was a junior golfer, on VHS tape and all the way through to today, and just always had a passion to look at golf swings, and always tried to seek out some really smart people to bounce ideas off and learn from. And it just, only being a director, only being a teacher, full-time teacher for 3 years, I can honestly say, since 1990 and a little bit before, I studied the golf swing a ton. So the club pro was just kind of a way to make a living, but teaching was always my passion. So.
Yeah, what made you decide to like dig so deep into like the science of it now, and then the biomechanics, and because
Sure.
I really enjoy your information you put out on the internet and your videos, and I've learned a ton from what you've talked about in the last couple of years. What kind of led you down that path before we get into the alpha stuff? I'm really curious about just your
Sure.
makeup of like, what, because not everybody's into that. You know what I mean? Like even some of the greatest teachers could say, we don't really care about some of the science stuff because maybe it's not applicable or whatever. I'm really interested in hearing like what your side of that is.
Yeah. I've always been interested in what makes the ball fly the way it does, and, the club and ball interaction. And so Brian Manzella was a friend of mine. We grew up basically together. He's a little bit older than I am, at City Park. And he had a golfing machine background. And, he was the one that kind of introduced that stuff to me. And I think if you read that book and you get involved with it at all, like I was, I think it kind of leads you down a road to kind of dig deeper. And,
For sure.
And so, I guess that kind of stoked the passion that I have in looking into the inner workings of the golf swing, how a golfer moves a golf club, and then how the ball moves because the golf club went through it. So, but then going out to see Ben Doyle, the first authorized instructor of the golf machine out in Carmel, California, obviously was a great impetus for me, digging deeper. And then really the first few teaching summits that I just talked about, it was me and Brian kind of hanging out with Ben Doyle and, just seeing the guys that he influenced all over the world, coming to him to say thank you to Ben. And, that was kind of neat, and just being kind of behind the scenes with, Ben and how he taught and how he respected the golf machine. And that kind of just, that was the early stoking the fire with me looking at the golf swing from a pretty, serious point of view.
Yeah, it's amazing looking back, now the more and more that we start to know about what's happening with the golf club, what's happening with the body, and everybody sort of bashes some of the things that Homer did with the Yellow Book, but it seems like so many of the top teachers, I mean, including I came in a little later with the golf machine, but it's influenced so many people to learn more and to dig deeper, like you said. It's just, I mean, that guy was amazing, right? I mean, you think about it, I mean, whether he was right or wrong, he definitely sparked a revolution to make people better.
There's no doubt. I mean, Search for the Perfect Swing came out in '68.
Yeah, I love that book.
And the Golf Machine came out in 1969. And, before those two books came out, it was mostly good players just telling their story of what they felt.
Right.
With a couple of exceptions, I'm sure, that are out there. But it was mostly, Hogan, Jones, Nicklaus, whatever the case may be, talking about what they felt. And these guys were, Kelly and Cochran and Stobbs were coming at it from a little bit more of a scientific lens. And obviously what they did has led to what I've studied over the last, 10, 12 years. And, the great research that's out there. And really the funny part is, I think if you talk to a guy like Sasha McKenzie, who actually teaches, kinetics and biomechanics in college, they like the golf swing because it's so dynamic and there's so many things going on. You could find something in the golf swing to teach, whether it's an equation or whether it's a formula or how to, do motion capture or whatever. And that's kind of a good thing for the golf swing, because you can hit balls into a net in a lab. You can capture it for these undergraduate and graduate students, and they can learn about the science of the golf swing.
Sure.
And then the golf swing is so dynamic, it makes for an interesting thing to study, which I think is kind of cool.
Were you a numbers kind of kid when you grew up? Do you love math, or did you just sort of evolve into that?
Wow, not at all. And I still don't like the math. I mean, it scares me to death. And when I read these papers, when I reread these papers, you get to the formula part, and I'm like, wow, it's like there's so much out there that I need to understand. And again, I lean on people like Dr. Kwan, Dr. McKenzie, Dr. Duffy, et cetera, Dr. Tuttleman. All these guys, I lean on them to explain to me what I'm seeing when I look at these equations. And trust me, I got about 5% understanding of all that stuff. So I'm just there. I'm right there with everybody else, trying to learn a little bit more as I go.
We're similar. And I was terrible at math, but it's like the more I get into teaching golf, I've learned more about physics. I've learned more about, biomechanics than I ever thought I ever think about using. I wish I'd have learned more about it when I was in college. So before we get into the alpha debate or the alpha wars, I think it's important, for the listeners out there that maybe aren't familiar with a lot of the language that we're going to use, if you could just describe, just basic description of what the three torques are, how the club moves, just describe, because I think it's interesting. The more I talk to other teaching professionals and I watch videos and whatnot, it seems to have, there's different descriptions. So I would love to hear from your point of view, how would you describe alpha, beta, gamma torque to just another teaching pro?
Sure. Every researcher, every teacher will have their own frame of reference, but, and from paper to paper, the frames of reference can change. So just kind of to be on the same page.
Right.
Imagine a face-on camera that's raised up at the level of the swing, like looking down at whatever, a driver, maybe at a 45-degree angle, kind of looking through the Hogan pane of glass. If there's an alignment rod coming out of the Hogan pane of glass going right toward the camera, that would be the alpha axis, or in the plane of the swing axis, and the club would rotate around that axis. So that would be, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about.
In plane rotation.
Correct.
Yeah.
That alignment rod coming out of the Hogan pane of glass, the plane board, if you will,
right,
going right toward the camera, and the club's rotation around that axis. Now, before I go on, that's even misunderstood. I mean, I think people see the golf club flying around the body and they think, oh, well, that's rotation. Well, it's really just the club rotating about itself, like if it was stationary. If it was stationary and the club was just rotating around, and that's caused a lot of confusion. Even in our alpha debate, that people have. But anyway, that's in the plane of the swing rotation. And then take the alignment rod and put it through your belt loops and get a down the line camera. That alignment rod going through your belt loops at address is going back toward the camera. That's the beta axis. That's the off plane motion, and the club rotates again. So
the club would be so the club's behind you. That's more negative beta, correct? Like flattening of the shaft, I guess, or
it depends on who you talk to. But if you see the club, quote unquote, like laying down,
yes,
that would be. I'm assuming most everybody terms that as negative
beta,
out of plane, negative beta.
Okay.
And then if it stands up, like a hacker may stand the club up, that would be a positive beta rotation,
Gotcha.
At least. Yeah. So that's alpha, beta, and then gamma, or about the shaft. Sasho calls it in, out, and about. Dr. Nesby calls it alpha, beta, gamma.
Yeah, you could call it whatever, right? You can name it whatever you want. It's just
you could say ABC, right? So gamma is about the long axis of the shaft. So it moves with, it moves obviously with the golf club. So that's not a stationary reference frame. It's inside the shaft and how the golfer twists the golf club around the long axis of the shaft. That would be gamma.
Gotcha.
Alpha, beta, gamma.
So which, and this is a question just for my curiosity, that I don't know that I asked Brian this, but I think you can answer it. Which torques do you feel should happen actively or passively?
Wow, that's a huge question. I think they all have bits of both.
Okay.
I think when you're hitting golf balls and when you're changing mechanics, I think you're probably going to have that active feel. Whatever might be passive, it's going to be kind of wrapped up into the active part anyway. It's all just a big mosh pit of forces and torques that we're putting into the handle. I mean, it's just actually Chris Coleman and I talked about this the other day. I mean, it's just whatever we're doing to the handle is just, it's a blending of all those three frames of reference and an infinite amount of other frames of reference, because not all motion is going to be alpha, not all motion is going to be beta. They all blend together. And to be able to answer that question, I think it's a little bit maybe above my understanding. But I think every swing, there's a combination of passive and active torques and forces. You can take advantage of some of them. They can get in the way sometimes.
Right.
You can harness them, but that's a tough question for me to answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's
Very
fair.
tough.
Yeah, obviously, I think there's a big debate. Obviously, I've done my research on a lot of the threads that you've been on, and
right.
It's difficult to understand. Like feel and real and all that stuff is very, very subjective.
But let me just say this, and I think maybe I didn't answer the question that you were really asking. Everything that the club does, we are inputting into the handle of the golf club. We can't blow on the club head to make it go faster with our breath. I mean, we're putting all of our inputs at the handle, and a good majority of those are active, inputs that we're putting in there, force or torque.
And that's what we're calling the couple, right? Is that we're saying, for everybody's language.
Yes.
I mean, you like that term?
Sure. The hands couple is, obviously the twisting and pushing and pulling on the handle. Now, but that and this is where it gets a little dicey too. We can pull on the handle. Say I pull back with both hands, the right and left hand, coming down toward the ball. I can pull on the handle, and that can cause a bit of a couple, and that can cause you're creating a force which creates. I don't know if we're getting there yet, but it creates a moment of force, which also creates a torque. So there's two different ways you can create torque. With the hands couple is one, twisting on the grip.
Right.
And then the overall net force that we create on the handle can miss the center of mass of the club and cause a rotation, which is also a torque. So this is where it gets a little fuzzy. For me, it gets fuzzy for everybody that kind of looks at this, and it gets real fuzzy for people that are just on the fringe looking at this stuff.
Exactly.
Because they're like, and then yeah. So anyway, I'll stop there.
I get it. Yeah, no, we can kind of get back to that, but so let's get into the debate, and from what I can understand, and we talked a little bit about it in my training session last week, was there's some different ideas about the way alpha torque is being applied at the ball, right? So just describe, like, for you, and I guess, and you mentioned Sasho, Dr. Kwan are talking about one thing, and then you got Brian and Jacobs and Dr. Nesbitt talking about something else. I mean, can you just sort of clarify that for the audience?
I can try.
Yeah.
I know I have a pretty good relationship with Sasho McKenzie, and I'm very familiar with Dr. Kwan, and obviously Chris Como is very familiar with Dr. Kwan, having worked under
Absolutely.
him. Now there's a gentleman in Japan. His name is Koike,
right?
Who has done some direct measurement.
The $1 million tool that's going to help us solve all the problems.
Yeah,
hopefully.
I guess I did hear it was $1 million. I had no idea it was that much money, but gosh, I hope it wasn't.
I hope so too.
Yeah, but so anyway, Kwan, Koike, McKenzie, and then you can throw Dr. Neal, Rob Neal. You can throw Mike Duffy, and Dave Tuttleman, and a few other people that have cared enough to kind of look into this stuff. And other than Koike, all those guys I mentioned are doing the same thing that Stephen Nesbitt is doing, supposedly, inverse dynamics. That means taking a 3D motion capture, taking the motion of the golf club, and retroactively figuring out what the forces must have been to make the club move that way.
It's like reverse engineering, sort of, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Now there's a lot of hoops to jump through. One of which we may talk about, we may not. The closed loop, the right hand and the left hand, are on the club. Yeah. So anyway, how about ground forces nowadays? You got guys that are selling two plates. The right foot and the left foot are pushing it. Those are direct measurements. What we're talking about on the handle of the club that Kwan, McKenzie, Duffy, Tuttleman, Nesbitt are all doing is inverse dynamics calculations. Reverse engineering what the forces and torques must have been. So there's going to be, no matter what, when Koike comes out with his directly measured stuff, whether people like it or not, how accurate it is, who knows. But direct measurement is always going to be better than calculations. Always.
Right. Sure.
However, there's some pretty tried and true, really old biomechanical ways of doing the inverse dynamics that are accepted by everybody, that those guys have done. Now, Dr. Nesbitt did the same thing in all of his papers. Those guys have even said that Dr. Nesbitt approached it in the same way. Mm-hmm. However, and this is where it gets a little bit in the weeds, there was a softball paper by one of his students. She wrote a big thesis about a softball bat swing. And he wrote an article a couple of years after the thesis was published. And I tell you what, I've got it right here. If you can indulge me here,
absolutely.
I'll read a couple. This is the paragraph that kind of threw me for a loop and kind of throws a lot of people for a loop, if I can get it on here. So he says, okay, I want to make sure I get this right. For these three studies, and I have to give you the context, the results may be misleading. So what he's trying to say is a traditional biomechanical approach that Kwan, McKenzie, and those results might be misleading. And this will be in the weeds, but let me get past this.
Yeah,
bat
sure.
moment of inertia about the point is a function of bat mass center location, and mass center inertia, which effectively summarizes these three mass properties into one quantity. And this quantity is dominated by the location of the mass center. In addition, for this measure of bat inertia to be more relevant, the location of the bat mass center should be measured relative to the actual center of rotation of the bat. So he's making 2 points there. I'll try to explain that. He's making 2 points, that the mass center dominates the inertia of the bat, which may be true for a golf club, may not be true. I'd have to ask somebody. And then he says you have to measure the location of the bat mass center should be measured relative to the actual center of rotation of the bat. Okay, this has caused 90% of the disagreement.
Yeah, where's that center of rotation at?
Exactly. The center. So what the center of mass of the golf club, you know how to find it.
Absolutely.
You balance it on your finger. It's just slightly off the shaft.
Yep.
If you trace the trajectory of that mass center around the golfer, it's making an arc, and sometimes it's moving in a sharp curve. Sometimes it's moving a little bit flatter.
Right.
The center of that center of mass, the rotation center of that center of mass travel moves. And Dr. Nesbitt is trying to make a case saying that this is more important to the golfer because as the center of mass's trajectory changes, its center of rotation changes, and all bets are off, and the torques that the golfer has to input are going to be different than the traditional biomechanical approach. That has led us to a lot of this back and forth, and Jacobs and Manzella, Sasho and Kwan are doing baby mechanics, and Dr. Nesbitt's doing big boy mechanics.
Right, the pop mechanics or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the crux of at least that little point. And there's a bunch of other stuff that's going on here. But okay, and I'll slow down here.
No, you're good.
The force. So Isaac Newton pretty much said force equals mass times acceleration.
Right.
And torque equals inertia times angular acceleration. So it moves left or right. The force is on the left side of the equation. The mass and the acceleration are on the right side of the equation. What Nesbitt is saying, in my mind, and this is after reading everything, reading all of everybody's stuff. In my mind, Nesbitt is taking the motion of the golf club, what we just said, how the center of mass is moving around the body, the golfer's body. He's taking the motion of the golf club and saying that that's affecting the force or affecting the torque, when physics doesn't work that way. Force affects the mass. Torque affects the inertia. So Dr. Nesbitt, I think, is moving right to left instead of left to right. And I know this might be in the weeds for the people that are listening. However, it's a fundamental of physics that the motion of the club doesn't affect the force. The force affects the motion. And they never really have gotten a real good answer on that. I know Dr. Nesbitt has been on a couple of videos with Michael Jacobs in the past, but never has been directly addressed, which brings me to the most important point of what I wanted to get across to you tonight is that Kwan, McKenzie, Duffy, Neal, Tuttleman, they are there for peer review, not just published paper peer review, but to answer questions on their methods and why they calculate things a certain way. Dr. Nesbitt obviously has papers that are have been peer reviewed, and he's a very smart guy. I've met him a couple of times. He did Anti-Summit, two with us, with me and Brian. Super nice guy, super smart guy. He has put Jacobs and Manzella out front on purpose to explain his approach, his methods, and that's been kind of the failure on their part. Is they try to explain Nesbitt's point of view, but they really aren't equipped to do so. Now they'll argue to the teeth that they are, that Michael Jacobs has spent an inordinate amount of time with Dr. Nesbitt, and he's qualified to speak on his behalf. But if you talk to the PhDs that are on maybe this other side of this discussion, debate, war, whatever you want to call it, they will say they couldn't have a functional discussion with those guys because they're golf teachers. Like me, I need to be out of the discussion too. I'm not qualified to be in the discussion, but they aren't either. And if Dr. Nesbitt were to come out and say, hey, let's have a healthy discussion about my methods and what Michael is seeing through Jacobs 3D, if he were to come out, I promise you in 15 minutes, those guys could figure out the samenesses, the differences, why Nesbitt went down the roads he went down, why Mackenzie goes down the roads he goes down, and they might agree to disagree, or they might agree that, oh, well, that's a great way to approach it. I'm just looking for some good answers.
Right.
I don't care whether Jacobs, Manzella, Nesbitt, Mackenzie, or Scott Cowks is right. I don't care who's right. I just want to get some good information so I can become a better teacher and I can dispense better information and be a better lesson giver to my students. That's my motivation.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where we're at too, is, and I know the book's coming out, right? And that's kind of the answers that I'm getting,
Sure.
which I can understand. If that's the way it is, then you're obviously they're bound to not say anything until the book comes out. So hopefully that's going to give us a lot of great information to where, do you think there's a way for both sides to come together after this and work, or is it just too different?
No, I definitely think that there could be some, the more you understand what Dr. Nesbitt is doing, I think everybody could say, well, that's meaningful. What you're doing, Dr. Nesbitt, there is meaningful. It's meaningful to the person swinging the golf club. So then it should be meaningful to the person giving a golf lesson. If we can understand why he's considering the motion to be affecting the force, he's going to have to give a really good argument, because it's just, I've asked people well outside this discussion that are PhDs in their field, and they just go, what? It's like, what are y'all arguing about? Go ahead and directly measure. No, this can't. So it's pretty funny that it's kind of gotten to this 4 or 5 years now, however long it's been.
Yeah.
But I think it's sad in a lot of ways. But Brian and I, along with John Hardesty, who you may know, I think
I do know John. Yep.
John and I worked together at Owl Creek, my job that I left a couple of years ago, and we set out to find. Actually, John was the guy that kind of said, "Hey, there's some really good information out there." And Brian and I were still on the golfing machine, role there, and Brian was at MIT, Better Golf Through Technology, this 12 years ago. And Dr. Robert Grover came up to Brian and said, "Hey, man, there's a mistake in every paragraph of that book." And Brian's like, "No, this book is right." And no, let me show you this. This is. And Brian came to me, and I'm like, nope, golf machine is 100% correct. Blah blah blah. So it just took it took slowly. We kind of figured it out that, hey, there is some good research out there. There are people like Mura. There are people like Mackenzie. There are people like Spriggins and Neal and Vaughn and all these other guys and Nesbitt that are doing research out there. And John Hardesty is the one that says, hey, let's go find it. So initially, Brian and I and John and a couple of other people were looking up these papers and starting to read these papers. And so I was the one that picked up the phone and called Dr. Nesbitt. I called, other guys, made relationships with other guys. We did Anti-Summit 1, Anti-Summit 2. Everybody kind of made fun of the name, but we had fun doing it, trying to bring out better information about the golf swing. And so then after a few years of kind of dealing with Quan and Mackenzie and Nesbitt and a few other Duffy and Tuttleman and a few other people, Michael Jacobs and Brian Manzella decided that Nesbitt had all the answers, and they have become, what they've done is they've put their flag in the ground and they've said, you know what, Dr. Nesbitt has it figured out. He's beyond reproach. He's the most advanced. He's doing the adult math. Everybody else is doing the baby math, and this is our new, for lack of a better term, and they'll probably be offended by this, but this is their new golfing machine. They're sticking the flag in the ground. Jacobs 3D is their new golfing machine. We're back to where we were 15 years ago, saying The golfing machine was 100% right. And I don't think Sasha McKenzie is flawless, infallible. I think he makes mistakes just like everybody else.
Well, sure.
He's admitted to mistakes to me. He's admitted to mistakes to everybody. Dr. Kwan has all his math on his website. Sasha McKenzie has videos to explain how he does his inverse dynamics. Dr. Nesbitt has his published papers, but when Jacobs 3D came around and Brian started talking about adding a positive hands couple, as it turns out at Impact, all Sasha said was, I haven't seen one. Not saying it's impossible,
right?
But I haven't seen one on a full swing, on a full powered swing. I haven't seen a positive couple at Impact. So not saying that you can't do it, but haven't seen one.
So is that when you guys kind of split up? I mean, was that the deciding factor of like, it's a shame that friendship was hurt?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's no doubt. Brian and I were great friends for a long time. I knew you were, yeah. I saw him about 3-4 days ago. My son was playing in the golf tournament down in New Orleans, and Brian was out watching another one of his students. He came by and said hi to everybody, shook his hand, and he went off. And, in the past, he would have gone around 18 holes with us, when we were down there. But it's a shame, I think Sasha said, somebody needs an alpha, beta, gamma intervention. And Jacobs and Manzella took that as a shot. And all Sasha was trying to say is, hey, look, Nesbitt's not perfect. He's not perfect, just like I'm not perfect. And so you can't take everything 100% infallible. And they took offense to that. And that's 4 years ago. Then there's been some, early on, some bad gears data. Michael Neff, please don't take offense to that. I'm just saying that there were some bad captures. Who knows how good the captures are nowadays? The noise in the data, the interpretation of the noisy data. Who knows who's right? But let me make this one point before I forget to make it.
Sure.
I think I hope you have 1,000, 10,000 people listen to this, but realistically, you probably don't. The people that are listening to this are hardcore golf teachers. Hopefully you have a lot of just casual golfers.
Yeah, there will be.
Why is this important? Why is it important? I think understanding how a golfer speeds up and slows down the golf club is pretty doggone important when it comes to the golf swing. And if we can't agree which way the sign and magnitude of the forces and torques of the club going around the golfer's body, if we can't agree on that, how to tease that out, how to measure it, how to calculate it, if we can't agree on that, we are doomed to go any further in this biomechanics of the golf swing. Because, I mean, I think that's probably the most basic thing in the world. How do your hands speed the club up, and how do you slow it down on the other side of your body so your arms don't rip off your body? That's and people say this all the time. What's it? Joe Mayo, he gives me grief. Who else? Who else gives me grief about this? A couple of well-known instructors say, Rob Holding gives me Mike. Why is this important? Well, you know what? Why is the D plane important? 20 years ago, nobody had any earthly idea what the D plane was. Yeah. Now we act like we've known it all along. So that's my point. The people that are on the sidelines making fun of this debate, making fun of this war, whatever you want to call it, are the ones that are going to jump on when everything gets fleshed out. They're going to jump on this information and use it to be better teachers. Right now, it's just a little bit muddy because we're trying to figure it out. And so that's kind of how I feel about this. People say, Mike, just don't worry about it. Just go on and teach your own stuff. Well, okay, but I want the scientists to tell us that, hey, yeah, this is how you speed it up. This is how you slow it down. This is how good players speed it up and slow it down. This is how hackers slow it up and speed it up and slow it down. And let's study the differences and what the good players do the same and what the bad players do the same. And anyway, that's kind of why I've done what I've done.
No, and that was one of my questions, and thank you for asking or answering that, because that's what we all want to know. Looking at this, from the sidelines, I'm way over my head as far, like you said, all this stuff is coming at us pretty quickly. But
Sure.
How do we apply this stuff to a golf lesson? How's that going to change the way we teach? And that's what we're all looking for, right? So, I mean, if you feel that strongly about it, I think there's going to be something come out of it. Now, for me, just, again, thinking logically, this closed loop thing I think is very interesting to me, because now that we're, trying to figure out the contribution of each hand. I mean, I think in each finger, I mean, now that's stuff you can kind of grab onto, right? Like we're trying to teach people to feel something different. So talk a little bit about that. Like explain to the listeners what the closed loop is. And I like one of your posts, you talked about even the closed loop of the feet.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
Well,
like, yeah, you're talking about the ground forces, which I'm a body track ambassador, so I'm big on a lot of this stuff, but I want to know how that affects the rest. How's the body move? How are the arms moving? How are the wrist angles moving? How's that moving the club? So talk a little bit about the closed loop and what if there is any debate there and solving it. I mean, is that really a thing, or is it more about measuring something better?
Yeah, I mean,
solving's a big word, right?
Yeah. Yes. Body track and swing catalyst, one plate is a closed loop. I mean, you can't divine the individual foot contributions to what it's doing to the ground. Now, the two force plates, obviously, that you're directly measuring the contribution of the foot onto the ground individually. So the closed loop is broken and it's directly measured. So, and obviously, we have two hands on the golf club. And there are an infinite amount of ways that we can scissor, push, pull, scissor on the grip, twist it. There's an infinite amount of ways and get the same resulting motion of the golf club. That's why it's so difficult to do what these guys are doing with their inverse dynamics. They have to boil it down to the one net force, like the hands are acting together. Dr. Nesbitt in all his papers.
Is that the 50-50 debate?
One of the assumptions is, and it's a pretty big assumption, it's on one line. We're going to, I think, equipollant or maybe equipollant is something that Vaughn used, but yeah, he's assuming 50-50 contribution of the right and left hand. At different times in the swing, our hands are doing, different percentages of the work.
Yeah,
and,
I was going to say, it has to be.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. So to assume that it's 50-50 throughout the golf swing taints the data right there. So, the closed loop, Dr. Kit Vaughn is a guy who's a biomechanist, I guess, maybe an engineer from way back. I kind of corresponded with him. He's in South Africa now. He's out of all this, research stuff that he did years ago. But he was a big researcher into the closed loop and did a bunch of papers on the closed loop problems. It's just when you have more variables and you have equations to solve them. So you can't find an answer. And basically he said, through optimization programs, you can quote unquote solve the closed loop. Yeah. with a huge amount of computer crunching, and you could through optimization, you can solve the closed loop, but you really aren't solving it. You're not solving the equation because there's too many variables to be solved. So, for Jacobson Manzella to claim that they have solved the closed loop solved is very bold. And like I've said numerous times, Nobel Prize in physics worthy. So I hope they have. It would be great.
Absolutely. I hope they do.
We can all fly over to Stockholm and celebrate with Dr. Nesbitt. But if they did it, that's fantastic. Okay, so on the ground, I've heard rumors that they've kind of gotten they're going to be able to do inverse dynamics of the ground forces. So swing catalyst, body track, smart to move, yeah. All these other companies, they're out of business if Dr. Nesbitt has figured out a way to just use math to figure out the ground forces into the ground, just by using inverse dynamics. And I think the people that I've talked to that would know say that the vertical forces, the up and down forces, are probably fairly easy to do because you can see your body moving up and down, and
sure,
you can kind of predict the forces. The way the feet horizontally work on the ground, independently, right and left, and then together, right and left together on the ground, when the foot isn't moving, good luck. Good luck on that. There's
Right.
really no way to inverse dynamic calculate your way to the horizontal forces. You can probably get the vertical forces, no problem. No, I'm sure it's a lot harder than no problem.
Sure,
but,
sure.
I
get it.
Anyway, so that's another thing that they've said that they've done, and again, more power to them. Dr. Nesbitt is a smart guy, and maybe he's figured something out, and we'll see what happens. Let's see. You were talking about the closed loop, and
Yes.
the applicability to golf lessons.
Yes, that's what I'm really curious about. Like, what do you think how's that gonna change the way we
Right.
teach? That's what we all want to know.
Think about down the line. Think about Zach Johnson. Then think about Fred Couples. Then think about, so Zach Johnson's on one end of the equation, on one end of the spectrum. Who's a real big swing lefter guy? I mean, most of them are nowadays. Guys that the hands disappear left, and then they've got guys like Hiller,
like Cam Champ now, I guess.
His hands go pretty, yeah,
kind of, sort of.
Yeah,
I mean, he's a
probably
fader.
right, yeah. So a guy that the hand you're looking down the line,
Yeah.
hands going left.
Yeah.
Then the hands that are kind of staying out in front of the body, and you can see the right kind of flip over the left.
Yeah.
VJ
Mickelson,
Singh, Mickelson,
Yeah.
Hale Irwin, the guy that won not too long ago, Mark Leishman, the big
Yeah.
guy. Anyway, so you got a guy like that on your lesson tee, not a tour player, obviously, a guy that hands don't disappear and the hands kind of flip over. And why are they doing that? Maybe they have intuitively figured out that if they have that look, they don't slow the club down as much. Maybe they're avoiding applying the negative hands couple that is, according to Sacho and a lot of the other guys, is ever present in most full powered swings.
Yeah.
Maybe these guys that have these wrists that are doing a lot of motion to and through impact are people that have figured out, I can swing the club faster if I do this. The guys with intact grips, the right hand pushing up against the left thumb. Some might say keeping a penny up against your left thumb, like Tom Resendez. Somebody with an intact grip and the hands moving left. Maybe they're slowing the club down. Maybe they're leaving some miles per hour on the table. And if you're Cam Champ, maybe you can do that. If you're Dustin Johnson, maybe you can do that. You
Sure.
can leave 5-10 miles an hour on the table.
Yeah.
But little guys that might need to use that speed. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I see somebody with their right hand peeling off their left hand, or, VJ, a la VJ Singh, near impact, I used to want to always change that person. But
Gotcha.
now I might say, hey, this guy, whoever is in front of me, might need that, because the hand coming off is a sign that maybe there's not as much hand slowing the club down, and maybe he needs that
For speed.
to speed it up. And that's just one example. That's just one example of the applicability of all of this stuff. And I don't know. I just think it's kind of neat to look at and to see and to watch baseball players, if their hands split apart at impact, and golfers and how we're powering the golf club through the handle of the club is I think we're at the infancy of understanding and studying it. So.
Yeah, I mean, my friend John Sinclair, he's kind of my go-to guy when I have questions about all this stuff. Way smarter than I am. He talks a lot about the different force that the players, especially from like early transition, that they're applying to the club. And that I'll tell I'll use the orange whip and tell people to actually pull down on the handle sometimes. It really affects with whatever hand is doing less work, right? So it's an interesting drill that we've started testing golfers with, and it really changes the pattern very quickly if they start to be aware of which hand's doing more work, which hand's doing less work, and the golfer can feel that. I mean, it's amazing when you ask them, it's like, which one's doing more work? Well, the left hand feels like it's pulling. Well, it's pulling in the wrong direction, out of plane, or hand paths going out, they over-the-top guys. So, I mean, is that something you found in your lessons? I mean, what are some of the things that you do if somebody is coming in too steep or swinging too far to the left? I mean, just from a technical standpoint, you have any go-tos that work for you?
Yeah. So before I get to that, I'd say that the hands couple, the twisting on the handle is dominant when the club is moving slowly. Takeaway, transition. When the club's moving slowly, the couple dominates. And then after the club gets up to some speed, the moment of force, which we really haven't talked 100% about, but the moment of force, the net force pulling the club, the grip off the shaft, it becomes the dominant. It's the torque that dominates. The club getting up to speed, the club changing direction. So
keep that in the back of your mind too. Like answer the question and then talk about that moment of force afterwards. I'm curious about that as well.
Sure. And so I'm sorry, refresh my memory on the question you just asked.
Just tactics or anything you use to shallow people out from early transition.
Sorry, yeah. So I don't know, this might sound like a little bit of a cop-out answer. I think people struggle, and you probably agree with this. I think people struggle with steepening and shallowing because of bad club face control. I mean, have you ever seen
100%.
Yeah. So I'm constantly going to the root cause. I think the root cause is club face control and trying to explain to them, hey, this club is, halfway down. I don't know what P it is. I don't worry about that. That when the club's parallel to the ground, the
P6.
Club face is pointing, 90 degrees away from the target. It's pointing to your golf cart on the side of the golf tee. And then very soon after that, the club is hopefully pointing at your target. So it has to cover 90 degrees
late closing.
Very, very short amount of time.
Sure.
So the shallowing, and I find it easy to shallow people that have slightly closed club faces. I find it very tough to shallow people that have slightly open club faces. And I never really have any trouble getting people to understand that. Now, some good golfers that stand the club up just a little bit, do they need to feel a little bit of active coupling, negative beta, whatever? Do they need to feel a little bit of that? Sure. And you can do that 100,000 different ways. George Gankis does it his way.
Pivot.
And other people can probably just manipulate it with their hands. And it's really getting, the shaft to behave, but the shaft behavior is going to come when club face control is improved. And again, that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I just don't have any trouble shallowing anybody out that has a halfway decent club face.
Yeah.
Once you explain to them what you want to do.
Yeah. Would you say like you try to get them to hit pulls for a minute and then react to that miss as opposed to, hitting slices or hitting it to the right?
I'm pretty big on neutralizing grips. I don't like giving people strong grips. I don't like people giving people weak grips. I like getting neutralized grips and then saying, okay, this is where we are. Do we have to turn on a little knob at the top of your swing?
Yeah, a little motorcycle.
Flexion extension is going to control the face at the top of the swing when the club is cocked. When the club is coming down near the ball, the supination, pronation of the lead arm is going to close and open the face. That blending of those two things is really my go-to for people that are struggling with open club faces. And then once they understand those mechanisms, a little bit of flexion and a little bit more supination. Yeah. Once you get the club face more closed, then the club's going to start to shallow. It just will. And so that's kind of where I go. I don't use those words, although I shot a short video the other day with some young students talking about supination, and I knew I would get jumped. I knew I would get jumped for it, but I did it anyway. It was kind of like a laugh.
No, I think it's okay to. I mean, simple. Obviously, it's not super simple, but I think students can understand flexion and extension. Pretty basic. Supination, pronation, maybe not so much, but I mean, once you start demonstrating or getting them to feel stuff, I think it's not a bad. I'm big on that. I think, but that's one thing I enjoyed about your video was something that we talk about all the time at my academy is blending that. We've sort of stole the motorcycle move, from Tyler, which I really think it's a great analogy. So blending the motorcycle move with sort of an early correct closing of the club face with loading the fourth accumulator with torso running into the lead arm, those two things, because obviously that, like you said in your video, that's an opener. right? When the torso starts to open, that can be an opener, right? And that slows the face down, and we're trying to add more closing with the lead wrist. I think that's a big challenge for our average golfers.
There's no doubt, and you have TrackMan, so a couple of degrees off, the ball's in the right rough.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So, and we're not talking about a bunch. People assume, well, I have to Dustin Johnson at the top, and I have to feel like I'm just slamming my lead arm, rotated closed. No, you don't. I mean, we're talking fractions, and you can have a whole new golfer in front of you if you just get them to close it just a little bit.
Absolutely.
So
That's good.
So
get on your moment of force. I want to remind you there, because I know you want to talk about that. So explain that a little bit. I think it's a good subject.
Yeah. So Sasho described the two types of torque, and every animation that he does, visualization of the golf swing, includes the two parts of the torque. So he has the total torque at the bottom, and the two parts are the moment of force and the hands couple. We've talked a little bit about the hands couple, working on the handle back and forth with the right and left hand, and twisting it. The moment of force is all the leftover force that the golfer is basically, if you look at all of his videos, if you look at all of Nesbitt's videos, the ones that you can understand, of the animations, I should say, a decent golfer is trying to rip the grip off the shaft.
Right.
And a little bit off the longitudinal axis of the shaft, a little bit off. And down near the ball, the golfer's trying to redirect the club head by pulling up and in on the grip with a lot of force, or the club would fly away. And that's the old 100 pounds. That club feels like it's 100 pounds. Yeah, we're trying to redirect. We're trying to use that force to redirect the whole golf club, and we're pulling in a certain direction. That certain direction, which is basically pulling the grip off the shaft, has a line of action. Dr. Kwan and Dr. McKenzie called it a line of action. So does every other person, physics person. And that line of action misses the center of mass of the golf club. The center of mass, in response to that line of action, wants to rotate toward it, like basically try to catch it, in the golf swing terms. It's a leading line of action where the club wants, and that's how we create so much speed. We're pulling the grip off the shaft, and the club wants to keep torquing positively forward. Now, at the same time as that club wants to rotate forward, because from that positive moment of force torque, our hands can't keep up. The bottom hand, the right hand for a right-hand golfer, it runs into the four fingers of the right hand, and the club gets slowed, and that's where the negative hands couple comes from, which causes, stay with me, lead deflection, and causes the shaft.
That's what I was going to get to. Is that where the lead deflection comes from?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Brian and Michael Jacobs have a huge task in front of them when this book comes out. They have to explain why every shaft in the history of the game in a full-powered swing is in lead deflection. My contention is there's something at the handle that's slowing up the handle and making the head speed by to get into lead deflection. And that what that's slowing the handle is a negative hands couple. And, we've got some smart guys that would agree. So we'll have to see.
That's good. Thank you. That's a great description. All right. So let's help some young coaches out there. So if you were, you're still a young guy, but if you were your 25-year-old self,
I'm 51. I'm not young anymore.
So I've changed this question over the years. So if we're talking to your 25-year-old self, you're just getting into the business and you want to start teaching, what advice do you give that person?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm going to go to what I'm comfortable with, and what I'm comfortable with is digging, rolling up your sleeves and digging in. I was at the I'll get this wrong. It was a teaching and coaching summit in Florida at the Port St. Lucie, right? One of the first ones. And they had, you might have done it too, USA Today phone hotline thing. And this is late 90s, early 2000s. A guy calls, older guy, hey, what should I launch the ball? This is before all this. I mean, the gearhead equipment guys knew the answer. I didn't know the answer. What should I launch the driver at? And and why? And I'm like stumbling over my answers. This is 12 years into my, being a club, a professional, and I should have an answer for that. And that made me really think, like, I have no earthly idea what I'm talking about.
You had nothing to measure it, though.
But yeah, at that, and I had, okay, you got a 10-degree driver. Why does sometimes you launch it at 14 and sometimes you launch it at 6? I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So not that one question, but questions like that. I'm like, I want to be able to answer people's questions. When they ask me a question on the lesson tee, I want to be able to answer them. So what I did with John Hardesty spurred me on. Brian Manzella spurred me on. Making friends with guys like Paul Wood at Ping, Eric Hendrickson at Ping, Sasha McKenzie at St. Xavier University, Chris Como in Dallas, Justin Bruton, Art Maffei, Rob Neal, all these guys. I sought these people out. I asked them questions. They probably got tired of me asking them questions. A lot like Robbie Fales. He asks a lot of questions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love Robbie's a great man. But no, that's what I did. And I read as much as I can. I don't read, Lee Trevino's how-to book. I read, Stephen Nesbitt's paper on HubPath in 2005.
Yeah. I think that's where it's changed, right? I mean, I think, that we would have given that advice maybe 8-10 years ago, because I've read hundreds of books, like you have, and now the whole landscape has changed, right? I mean, you got the internet, it's so much quicker, and I think like podcasts now are basically like the new book, or audio books. People are trying to save time, and then you got certifications and all that stuff. So where do you get like papers? I think that's a great piece of advice right there. Yeah, exactly. It could definitely be difficult to read. What about just basics? Like where would you go, or what would you do? Like you made a great point there of surrounding yourself or reaching out to other people that you want to learn from. I think that's been a big answer for the podcast is, either going to observe them teaching or go spend time with them. You mentioned some of the people. Who are some of your other mentors that sort of helped you along the way?
Well, early on, it was Brian Manzella, who I still respect greatly as a teacher. I think he's a fantastic teacher, always has been. Ben Doyle obviously was a big, huge influence for me. Guys, Tommy Mudd, my college teammate, his brother Jody Mudd. Jody, I respect his knowledge of the golf swing. I mean, obviously, guys like Mac O'Grady that have spent the time to break down the golf swing, and you try to find people that have dug deep, and the emperor doesn't always have clothes, and sometimes you find out that these people that profess to know it all, not profess to know it all, profess to know a lot, might not know all that much, but it's okay. You can learn something from everybody. I greatly respect Chris Como. He's a guy that keeps an open mind. Me and too. He goes out and he tries to gather from everybody, and he respects everybody. And I respect everybody. The people that I have lowered respect for are the ones that come out and say, this is scientific and this is the way it works, but then can't back it up. And if there's a golf teacher or a golf educator or a certification program out there that says, come to us, we'll make you better, we'll shave 10 shots off your game, do this, do that, do this, more power to them. I will never, ever give those types of people or programs grief. However, when you say something is advantageous, mechanically advantageous because of this scientific principle, and then they can't apply it, then I've got some problems with that. And I think that's where I've run into some problems over the last 15 years with a Lynn Blake talking about the golfing machine, with a Andy Plummer talking about stack and tilt and Morad and the golfing machine, and Nick Clearwater talking about whatever he wants to talk about, the big data and golf tech, and who else? Jeff Martin, who he and Brandel Chambly are kind of buddies. They try to latch on to certain things and say this is scientific, and no, they really don't have it. They studied really hard Kelvin Miyahara, I've never seen any more detailed articles about the golf swing. Unbelievable. But it was all 2D observation, and you can only go so far doing what he did. And I respect the heck out of him for what he did. Bought a Phantom camera, and he's got the only Phantom stuff on the internet. And I think that's awesome what he did. But he would claim some things like, for instance, and I know I'm rambling on here.
It's okay.
Alvaro Quiros hits a driver 7 years ago, hits it on the toe, and after the ball's long gone, 10, 15 feet off the golf club, the club looks like it's still facing the target. Well, you know and I know it was a toe strike. Yeah. The club's opening up. It's a snapshot in time, and Jeff Martin and Kelvin are trying to say, hey, look, a stable club face.
Oh, gosh.
Baloney. It wasn't a stable club face. It was a toe strike, and it looks like a couple frames after impact that the club is still facing the target. And that's what I'm fighting against. I'm fighting against because Robbie Fales or Robbie Fales the third or Robbie Fales Jr.'s out there looking at that picture and going, oh, there's something I can do with my right elbow to make my club face more stable. No, that doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. So don't try to sell me that, bag of groceries, because I just not going to buy it. That's the type of stuff I'm fighting.
Yeah, I think, and that's a great point. Is how do you know, right? It's just testing it, right?
You don't.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of trial and error. I mean, regardless of what I always say, there's a couple of things in golf instruction is there's no absolutes. There's very few, if there are any. Test it out, right? Test it out.
Yeah.
Lots of blood, sweat, and tears on the lesson tee. Test it out on yourself, and then obviously, you're going to learn stuff as you teach more, and then you figure out, well, that didn't work,
exactly.
or this is definitely work. This makes sense, but that's why our business is so difficult.
Right. Another quick example, maybe kind of applicable. Jeff Martin was looking at Johnny Miller make a golf swing, and he was putting dots on a belt loop and showing how his hips cleared and never slowed. His hips never slowed. And Rob Neal's like, Phil Cheatham, they're like, wait, no, hips slow. Everybody's hips slow.
Absolutely.
Rotationally. And he's looking at a 2D video. He's putting a dot on a belt loop, and he's trying to say, well, his hips never slow. So I can just imagine people going out and just firing the heck out of their hips.
Oh yeah.
Trying to hit it like Johnny Miller. Well, my hips aren't supposed to slow, and they hurt their back or whatever the case may be. But you can just go to Phil Cheatham's data and say, well, Sergio Garcia's hips are slowing. Alvaro Quiros's hips are slowing. Dustin Johnson's hips are slowing. So it might be okay for my hips not to feel like they're firing 1,000 miles an hour through the golf ball. And it's just a human condition. Your hips are going to slow, speed up the torso. Torso is going to slow, speed up the arm. Yeah. Arm's going to slow, speed up the club.
Chain. Yeah,
exactly. And it just so trial and error, like you said, observation. Just beware of people that are trying to drag stuff off of a TV screen and try to build a golf swing theory around it. I've been challenged by Andy Plummer to become to find out a unified what's your unified theory of the golf swing, Mike Finney? I'm like, I don't have a unified theory of the golf swing. It's too complex for me to unify the theory. Yeah, it's like and to be presumptuous enough to say that I have a unified theory, it just seems like you're just trying to sell something to me. It's like, okay, it's like, yeah, so here it is, here's a book, and this is how it works. I just think that's a little presumptuous in my estimation. So, how
has a failure or a roadblock in your life set you up for later success? Do you have anything you can think of?
Well, I think I hate to say it, but I think my buying into the golfing machine and everything that it represented was a big. Let's see.
Did I lose you?
I think I might just try to put you on speaker here.
You're good. See. Yeah, I can still hear you.
Yeah, I think
You're good.
See. I'm gonna take the Wi-Fi Bluetooth off.
It's fine. We can cut it out. No big deal. I could still hear you before.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, okay. So buying in to the golf machine and everything that it represented was a wake up call for me when I found out it wasn't really what it was purporting to be. It really wasn't what other teachers were saying it was. I found out to not do what I think personally Brian and Michael are doing right now. I think they're buying into Dr. Nesbitt, who's a super smart guy, and they're saying this is how it is. Really, you can come with me with this other stuff, but really I'm going to go back to Nesbitt because all of his research is correct. All of his data is correct. So that's what I've learned. You can't buy – and am I buying into Sasha McKenzie, lock, stock, and barrel? Well, ask Sasha how many questions I've asked him about his stuff. Ask Sasha how many questions Chris Como has asked him about his stuff. He probably wants to change his phone number because we have bothered the heck out of him with questions. And I'm not saying he hasn't answered everyone perfectly to our satisfaction, but he's done a really good job. But he doesn't mind me calling Dr. Kwan. He doesn't mind me calling Dave Tuttleman or Rob Neal because he wants us to go double check him.
Well, it makes him better as well. You know, that's the thing is you're both improving.
Exactly.
He's going to find the answer. Like if he doesn't know it, he's going to figure it out too.
And I know Chris's questions, my questions has made Sasha a better golf swing researcher. I know for a fact. And I can't point to a particular thing, but and I know there's 100 other golf teachers that have called Sasha with questions that have made him a better golf researcher. So I guess to answer your question, what I've learned from is just don't put all your eggs in one basket. Just spread yourself around and double check and triple check everybody. And, you don't have to read all this crazy research, although I enjoy it. But you owe it to the people in front of you day in and day out to have an understanding of the physics, the engineering, and the biomechanics that go into moving that golf club. I think we owe it at least to a small degree to every one of our students.
Don't you think that part of that is the time in your life, right? Like when we're young, it's like every new thing we learn, we feel like it's gospel. You know what I mean? Like I just remember when I was, my 20s and I'm like, man, that's really cool. That looks awesome. That has to be right. You know what I mean? Like I think as we get older and mature, you start to evolve and have a bit more of an open mind, hopefully, right? I think the good ones do.
Right. There's no doubt. I think I've had to learn an open mind. I used to want everything to be really simple and just somebody could hand me a book and say, here, read this, and you've got all the answers. I wanted that. It seems like, hey, that's the easy way, but it just isn't that easy. And I've had successes and failures on the lesson tee. We're going to have successes and failures the next month, next year with the students that come and see us. My whole goal is if I helped 52 of my last 100 students become better golfers and enjoy the game more, my next 100, I want to help 53. And then I want to help 54 because I'm not going to help everybody, but I'm going to try. And that's really what it's all about. From my perspective is to become a better teacher, to dispense better information, and then maybe get to 55 out of 100, one of these days.
Absolutely. So we talk a lot about, kind of staying on that subject a little bit, but the difference between the IQ and the EQ. So the EQ being sort of the self-awareness, the empathy, reading the body language, sort of the bedside manner of giving golf instruction. Like how important do you think that is? Because obviously you're very high in the IQ part, and how would you teach a young person to learn that?
To learn what?
Just, it's great to have information. This is sort of what I'll preface that by saying, I'm mentoring a lot of PGM students. The Robbie Fails, Seth Murs, the kids that work for me are PGM students.
Right.
They're coming out nowadays with miles ahead of where I was when I was that age because of the information is available. They're hungry to get the information, but a lot of times they struggle early on with building the relationships, getting the student to trust them, just the the intangibles, as I would say, from giving a golf lesson and helping a student. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't really gone to shadow people to give lessons. I've watched, some of the lessons given at the summits and
but those aren't real. Those aren't completely realistic. You know what I mean? Like, I'm talking about, like, if you're really day in and day out, you're working with somebody, right? You better be able to switch gears really quick and pivot based on somebody's learning style or based on what they say, feedback, all that stuff that I think that good teachers do.
There's no doubt. And I've always, and it kind of goes back to a little bit about what we're talking about, I've always been more of a hands-on teacher, moving the club around.
Me too.
So
100%.
I'm putting my external forces and torques on top of their forces and torques. So I'm trying to put my feels into them as best I can. I'm more of a hands-on, move the person around type person. I'm not the put my hands in my pocket and read TrackMan numbers.
Absolutely.
Although for good players, sometimes I do that. It's like, hey, you're hitting it good. Let's try to do this with your path or whatever. But I'm kind of hands-on. I'm Michael Hebron. I've known Mr. Hebron for a long time, and I really appreciate what he does on the internet right now, trying to advocate for understanding learning styles and everything. And I tell you, the ball teaches everybody. The ball flight, they look up and they're either happy or disgusted, rarely in between. And and then going back to the D plane, understanding that, just understanding those little things, and then say, look, I got a story to tell you here. We've got some good swings coming up, and let's try to get there together, and just be encouraging. Try to be funny. You don't want to be boring. Try to mix it up a little bit, and just let them enjoy the game as best you can. And the bottom line is, they'll enjoy the game if they can, hit a less of a slice or a little bit of a draw, or hit it 10 yards further. They'll enjoy it quite a bit. So I don't know. I've done this for a long time, since 1990 when I started teaching, and I try to make it fun, and I try to give them some good information along the way.
There you go. I mean, you described it perfectly. I mean, it's making them comfortable, but I mean, obviously results are what make them come back and what make them enjoy the game more. So it's got to, that's my point. It's just blending both of those, I think, is essential for these young coaches out there to understand that it's not just doing a paper on swing plane and the moment of force. It's like, all right, how do we teach, and how do we deal with people? Because everybody's personalities are going to be different. Right. That's the stuff that we've been really kind of diving into.
Let me backtrack one second. I'll be real quick.
No, it's good.
One of the most important things I've ever learned about the golf swing is that the head and the handle are doing two different things. And once an instructor understands that, boy, a lot of things open up. I mean, you can have a path, a club head path of +3, and their hands can be disappearing left, and so the head and the hands are, in most good players, doing crazily different things, and trying to put somebody on a plane board and have the flashlight coming out of the hosel and the grip pointing at the baseline of the plane. Can that be a destroyer of good golf swings, of dynamic good golf swings? Of, okay, why is that guy at Oklahoma State, Matthew Wolf, why can he play? Because he's not trying to point the flashlight at the baseline of the plane. He's taking that off plane motion, and he's just tugging on it, and he's pulling it right back onto the functional swing plane that Dr. Kwan described. But the functional swing plane is the head only, not the full length of the shaft. And that's what I wanted to say. It's just, people have this vision of that shaft staying on that plane and doing something through the ball, and that's just not happening. Every inch of that shaft is doing something slightly different. And that was a huge, huge eye-opener for me when I'm still kind of understanding it. I kind of think about it all the time. I was like, man, just like the club is, it's not a uniform little thing, man. It's doing completely different things. I don't know why I said that, but I just
I think it's a great point. It definitely, I know you've made several points on not drawing lines. I mean, I've done so much less of that over the years now, because we're looking more at like you said, I'm looking at hand path and I'm looking at where the sweet spot and the, center of gravity or the center of mass of the club is, how that's working through the ball rather than working, on a line in 2D video.
Yeah, man. If you were able to put like a 3D line, like if you were able to jump through the screen and put a line on the shaft, and those might be somewhat useful that move around with all the different body, but you're putting a line on a screen. You might as well put a glass window, 20 feet behind your student and start drawing lines on it. Talk about leading people down some crazy roads. I just think about it all the time. It's like, it's so wrong. It almost circles around back to being right. It's like so bad. It's like a watch that's stopped. It's right twice a day. Sometimes these lines are so bad that they might have some meaning because they're just so off. And I don't know. That just really bothers me. Line drawing. It's the line drawing and then the angle taking that drives me crazy. If you want to draw a circle around somebody's head when they're swinging and say, "Hey, look, your head's moving around too much," that's fine. That's fine by me.
It's just a reference point.
Yeah, but if you're trying to create a swing theory on some lines that you draw on a page or a screen, you are doing a disservice to whomever you're trying to give that information to. I think personally.
I think it's a good point. So when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, or say sort of lost your focus temporarily, what do you do?
Yeah, that's a great question.
We all do in this business. It can drive you crazy.
Yeah. Sometimes, my dad was a sports writer. He wrote sports for 68 years in New Orleans. And I would watch him. He'd come home from the Super Bowl. And, even Lawrence Taylor on a documentary the other day said he came home after winning the Super Bowl and he said, "Is this all there is to it? Okay, what are we supposed to do now?" My dad, it's like, "Dad, is this meaningful to you covering sports for all these years?" And so when I think about the golf swing and how I kind of approach the golf swing, sometimes I wake up and go, I wish I was a doctor and I wish I was out there trying to cure cancer and pouring my whatever intellectual capability I have into something that could help. But you know what? I do something that's important, and I try to think about that as far as having people enjoy their retired years, or somebody, to shave a few strokes off their game. And I think people really enjoy playing better golf. So when I get unfocused, I think back to, hey, I want to try to help somebody enjoy the game some more. And I'm just going to, try to build a better way to making that golfer in front of me better. And then it usually it all comes back. And then calling friends and having them give you a pep talk that never hurts either, when you think you're just going down some bad roads, and they can a lot of times bring you back to reality. So
yeah, that's a good point. Do you have any other tactics? Do you meditate, or is there any? There's a lot of things that people do to kind of go, all right, let's get away from the busy.
No, I'll get on the internet and I'll look up LSU football recruiting. That's my meditation.
Okay,
I'll see what high school hot shots we're trying to sign, and that's kind of a big distraction for me. And then obviously my wife and kids, not a distraction. They're a big part of my life, obviously. And my son is 15, and I'm enjoying working with him and watching him grow as a man and a golfer. So that's a nice little distraction too.
Are you coaching your son?
I am. Yeah. He listens to me about 63% of the time. The other,
that's pretty good.
37%, maybe not so much. But
I've got one that's getting ready,
talented little boy,
getting ready to graduate high school as well. And I've coached him, so I feel your pain sometimes.
Yeah,
but it is rewarding.
Exactly. Well, it's a lot of fun, and I tell you, I don't know about you, but when I follow him on the golf course, and it just eats me alive. I want to hit the shots for him.
Me too.
But
it's crazy. That's
I'm
the hardest
sure you
part.
feel the same way. It's nerve wracking.
It is, for sure. All right, one more question. Thanks so much for your time. This has been very, very enlightening and very informative. If you could have a giant billboard anywhere with anything on it, a message, mantra, quote, metaphorically speaking, of course, what would it be and why?
Does it have to be golf related?
No. Like, I prefer not to be golf related.
Yeah, but I am. What you'll find is I'm not the most spiritual person. So I have great faith in God, and I'm a Irish Catholic from New Orleans, so I believe in God. But I think I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a pretty big LSU fan. My dad wrote the book about literally wrote the book on the history of the LSU football. So I was going to games since I was a little baby. And being in Louisville, Kentucky, at the UK U of L hate fest there in basketball, I'm the biggest LSU football fan there is, I think, on the planet. I'm sure some people would disagree with that, but if I had a billboard, I would probably just have a hold that Tiger. That's what it would say. That's when Coach Orgeron, when he gets a recruit, he puts on the internet, he says, hold that Tiger. That means somebody is committed to LSU. So that's a big part. I love going to LSU football games and watching them play. And there's my mantra. That's pretty shallow, but that's it. Hold that Tiger.
That's all right. That's good. Well, thanks so much, Michael, for coming on the show. And I've learned a ton from you, and I want to thank you for putting out such great information. And again, we're all trying to get better together, and I hope this whole thing works out with the feud and the kinetics and all this.
Sure.
I think it's going to be great for golf, and I hope I live long enough to figure it all out, just like everybody else. But
I appreciate what you do. This show's a great idea to have people on to kind of give their point of view on things, and I've listened to a bunch of the episodes, so I appreciate what you do. And as far as Brian is concerned, we were friends for so long. We'll be friends again. And I just hope he understands that what I've done is tried to keep an open mind and question the people that have been doing the research. And I guess part of my questioning of Dr. Nesbitt kind of turned those guys off, and that's why they've felt like they haven't been given a fair shake by me. But I asked just as many questions of Dr. Kwan and Dr. McKenzie, so I hope Brian realizes that. But again, thank you for doing what you do, because it's easy to say, oh, well, somebody else would do it, but you're taking the time and made a time and money investment in doing what you do. And like I said, maybe these podcasts can lift up the educational experience for the PGM and the assistants around the country just a little bit. And the aggregate of all that will be better teachers. Well,
I hope so, and I appreciate that. That's very nice. How can the listeners out there get a hold of you, follow you, say thank you?
Yeah, I guess on Twitter it's M Finney Golf is my handle, M Finney Golf. I'm the director of instruction at the University of Louisville Golf Club. My number's pretty easy. It's not that easy. 502-314-GOLF is my phone number, and if they want to give me a shout, if anybody in the Louisville area wants to come and talk some golf swing, I'm always up for that.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Jason.
What's up, everybody? Guru back here again with a couple of things before you jump off. First, big thank you to Michael Finney for coming on the show and sharing his side of the Alpha Wars debate, and also leaving us with some great information that you can apply to your teaching and your life. Make sure you reach out to Michael on Instagram and Twitter at mfinney.golf and say hello and say thank you for taking the time to come on the show and provide just some great information that's going to help our teaching here in the near future. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at GolfGuruTV. Check out my website at golfgurutv.net, where you can find videos, articles, and more information on my teaching and coaching. And if you have a question or a comment about the show, or just about anything in general, teaching-wise, email me at golfgurushow@gmail.com, or hit me up on the DM on the above-mentioned platforms. This show and all episodes of the Golf Guru Show are produced by myself, Jason Sutton. Music is by Zach Mullet, aka Cutta Beats. And also leave me an iTunes review. It's great to hear from you, and it also helps the show grow. Leave me a rating and let me know how I'm doing, good or bad. It's great to get feedback so we can improve. And I'll leave you with, as always, the infamous Jim Rohn quote: study, practice, teach, and then pass it on. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much for listening.